Iran supported the government in Syria, and with Iran's presence in Syria is because of the request of the Syrian government. And in the case of Iraq, Iran's presence and support for the creation of the Popular Mobilization Forces took place at the request of the Iraqi government when ISIS was advancing on Baghdad. We have to keep in mind that the West, contrary to the belief of many, the West created Al Qaeda and ISIS. This is something that they manufactured. In Syria, on September the 12th, 2012, Jake Sullivan, who is now the National Security Advisor of the US President, wrote in an email to Hillary Clinton, who was then the Secretary of State, that in Syria, Al Qaeda is on our side. This is online. Anyone can search and find it. But back then, ISIS was a part of Al Qaeda. Then ISIS split away because of internal differences. And then we had the US Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012, which was published. This is also online. This is the world's largest military intelligence agency in the world, affiliated to the Pentagon, a part of the Pentagon. In this document, the United States says that its regional allies want to create a Salafist entity between Iraq and Syria to isolate Syria and to put pressure on the relationship between these countries, but basically to overthrow Syria. And then later, in an interview on Al Jazeera with a reporter called Mehdi Hassan, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency at that time, General Michael Flynn, who briefly became the National Security Advisor during the first days of Trump's presidency, he said that the United States took a willful decision to support this. So who was this Salafist entity? It was ISIS. They occupied the area between Syria and Iraq. So the West supported ISIS and Al Qaeda. They still do, because the United States, as I said, in Tanf is assisting ISIS, and in Idlib, in the north of Syria, NATO is supporting Al Qaeda and ISIS affiliates. And during this civil war, or the dirty war to be more precise, because it was a dirty war imposed by the West where they use ISIS and Al Qaeda and other such groups. During the dirty war in Syria, alongside the Golan, where the heights which belong to Syria, which Israel occupies, there were both ISIS bases and Al Qaeda bases. And the Israelis supported both against the Syrian army. Whenever the Syrian army would try to advance, the Israelis would bomb them or use helicopter gunships or use artillery, and they would also treat the injured terrorists in their hospitals. So there's a long-standing relationship between these extremist groups and the West, and I consider Israel to be the West. And Iran sent troops to Syria and advisors to Iraq to defeat ISIS. And the general who led the war against ISIS, General Soleimani, General Qasem Soleimani, he was murdered by the Americans. So Iran's support for these groups is a misleading term, because in Yemen it's the government, in Syria it's the government, and in Iraq the Popular Mobilization Forces is a part of the Iraqi armed forces. In the case of Lebanon, Hezbollah is recognized by the government. It has members of parliament, it has members in the government, in the cabinet, and the government recognizes the resistance. In fact, Hezbollah was created as a result of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. It was a national resistance organization, and it ultimately kicked out the Israelis in the year 2000. So none of these are proxies.